Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse and more specifically beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Correllian tradition, and welcome to Midday with Reverend Don. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can interact with me directly by typing your comments or questions directly into whatever platform you're watching this on. They'll appear in my chat room and we can interact. And hello to Samantha in the chat room. It's good to see you. And I love spending this time with you each day, and I love being able to talk to you directly. Today, our subject is going to be stones and crystals. But before I begin that subject, I'm going to take a moment to plug myself and remind you that if you would like to support my work, you can do so by joining my Patreon at revdonlewis.com. And hello to Mary Hawk in the chat room, hello to Mary Cavalcante in the chat room, hello to Raven in the chat room. It's good to see all of you. Raven asks, how is my health? Well, you know, it's very good within the circumstances. It's something I probably will have to always be concerned with at this point in my life. But I'm feeling fine, I'm doing fine, thank you for asking. I take my multitude of pills every day. And waiting for my next doctor's appointment, and we'll see. I am personally confident that it's good and will only get better. But if you'd like to support my work through Patreon, we have a number of tiers. We do things like seminars, newsletters, etc. Also, CorrellianPublishing.com. We have many interesting things available there. And also, I am once again doing readings. If you'd like a reading, you can instant message me through Facebook or Instagram, or email me at donlewishp@aol.com and set a reading up. And hello to Jan Moe in the chat room. Good to see you, Jan. So these are all the various things that I do. Hello to Kazan in the chat room. And in September, I'll once again be doing seances. A seminar on seances in September, and then the actual seances throughout the month of October. And this is a custom that I've observed many years, not every year, particularly recent years, but for a long time. And why seances in October? Well, people look for them in October. Hello, Antonio in the chat room. Good to see you, Antonio. So today we're going to talk about stones and crystals. And hello to Draskus in the chat room. Good to see you, Draskus. And stones and crystals have been being used by people probably as long as there have been people. Certainly as long and even well before any form of recorded history. The first tools we used included stones. And we seem to have used them certainly for adornment and presumably for spiritual purposes from the very start. There are numerous examples of prehistoric graves that show people heavily adorned with stones and or shells and similar items, or show them being used in homes, in settlements in ways that are pretty clearly metaphysical. And hello to Aiden in the chat room. Hello to Melanie Silver in the chat room. Good to see you, Melanie. Hello to Sean in the chat room. Good to see you, Sean. Now, Mary asks, can two people do the seance together? And I'm going to assume you mean, can two mediums do a seance together? Yes, they can. Absolutely. I've done that. Even a larger group than that. In fact, everyone present can be a medium and simply shift from one to the next according to whatever way they'd like to do it. And obviously, many people can be part of it as attendees. And hello to Renee in the chat room. Good to see you, Renee. So if we look at those prehistoric burials and the things that are found in ancient prehistoric archaeology sites, we see stones being used in these ways very early. We see also bones being used this way. One of the ones I talk about in my books is there's a famous cave, I don't remember the name off the top of my my head, but it has human habitation over a very long time, including including hominids well before modern humans. One of these had a group, I believe, of 7 habitations. Each one had a fox's skull at the door. It's hard to believe this is anything that's not metaphysical. Metaphysics has been with us that long, before we were modern humans. And the use of stones in metaphysics certainly appears to be one of those things. How those stones are used, even in those prehistoric burials and other sites, is certainly consonant with the idea of metaphysical use. And it is worth noting that it also develops throughout history. There are stones we use today that were not used historically for various reasons, were not used in the same ways. And that's because of technological changes. If you look at the earliest use of stones, they're mostly certain stones that are easy to work. The harder stones don't show up. It's like if you ever watch a historical movie about something like ancient Egypt or ancient Sumeria, and somebody's wearing diamonds, they should not be, because those were not being used in that way because they couldn't be cut yet. They do show up fairly early, but not in their modern form. Modern diamond cutting is a 16th century phenomenon. In fact, one of the most interesting features of diamonds, when you look at Renaissance paintings, you'll often see, for example, the famous paintings of the wives of Henry VIII. They often have these little black stones in their jewelry, even though they're dressed very colorfully. And this has given people the idea that Renaissance jewelry often had these black stones in it. But as I have been taught, and you can see this develop in the next 50 to 100 years of painting, these were actually diamonds. They did not have a good way of painting them, and the way they were cut and set at that time looked much darker than what came later. But you can quickly watch as they discover how to paint the facets, and you'll see them develop from these basic black stones to a much more realistic depiction of more modern diamonds, which also accompanies the development in how they were cut. And if you see older diamonds, but Renaissance era diamonds, you'll also see part of why they saw them that way, why they painted them that way. And if you ever try to paint a diamond, you'll also know why it's difficult. But this speaks to how things have changed. Now, people use stones in all kinds of different ways. The most obvious is simply to have a stone that you carry with you, to bring its properties around you. And hello to Bradley in the chat room. Good to see you, Bradley. You might carry it in your pocket. You might wear it as a piece of jewelry. And this works on the premise of sympathetic magic, that like attracts like, and that if you're using a stone that has a certain property, you'll pull that property around you. And an example is the pearl. And we have a pearl here. This is Lady Crystal's black pearl that I often wear. And it's not exactly the type you'd put in your pocket. In fact, pearls in general are not something you carry in your pocket because they're very soft. But their quality metaphysically is that they hold on to good, positive emotional energies, and they stimulate good, positive emotional energies. If that's what you want to have around you, pearls are excellent to use. Bradley says, I have carried tiger's eye in my pocket for over 10 years. Tiger's eye is a stone for verbal skill, persuasion, eloquence, safety in traveling, and also prosperity and success in business and commerce. Samantha says, I have Angelite crystal pendant from the crystal shop near me. People often wear stones as pendants, as pieces of jewelry. Of course, many people who are not into metaphysics are not wearing them for metaphysical purposes, but people who do practice metaphysics are using them for metaphysical purposes more often than not. Drasmus asks, are there any examples of ancient tables of correspondences for stone, and where there are modern systems of correspondence originated? I believe there are some examples of ancient correspondences to stones. Certainly from the Greco-Roman world, possibly even a little earlier. Julia, hello Julia, says, I wear moonstone. However, those sources from the ancient world tend to be limited, but we know, for example, that amethyst in the ancient world specifically was used for self-control and moderation in behavior. And also when you wanted to keep something, well, when you wanted to keep situations under control, whether it was your personal self-control, whether you wanted to keep conversations private, amethyst was considered very good for this. It was good for personal sobriety. It was often used to combat things like drunkenness or other times when a person lost control. That isn't always how we use it today, but it is how it was used in Roman times, for example. And we know about a number of those. But where do our modern correspondences originate? Well, they've come from a number of sources and they don't always agree. So to some extent, you have to go also by your experience or by the background you come from. And being me, I'm going to say the fact that they don't always agree doesn't necessarily mean they're wrong. It means there's more than one way to approach it. The correspondences and symbolism I use when dealing with stones, I believe mostly arises from ideas of their color and, of course, also their individual vibration as interpreted by people. There are other ways to approach it. Now, Kazan says, I never forget when I put my clear crystal in my pocket. The crystal becomes hot in my pocket. I was surprised. Yes, stones, especially quartz crystal, will pick up energy and respond, and they can become very hot or very cold. So let us, we mentioned quartz crystal. Here is some quartz crystal in our Crystal Web Access Kit, which you can find at CorellianPublishing.com. Quartz crystal is probably the most commonly used stone in metaphysics today. And quartz crystal is a clear crystalline stone. And it's kind of like the equivalent of a white candle. It can be used for virtually anything. What it does is it amplifies anything it deals with. It doesn't necessarily have energy. It doesn't have a focus of its own. It takes its focus from you, but it will amplify whatever focus you give it. It's also like lighting a candle. A candle will amplify the energy. Other things may give that candle focus, like the color of the wax, and primarily the focus you put on it. But the flame itself amplifies the energy. The color white in a candle amplifies the energy. Whatever you're using it for, quartz crystal does the same. So Jason in the chat room, hello Jason, Fluffy, asked if I have any experience with taking a stone with a set correspondence and changing that correspondence, or inverting that correspondence. And he gives an example of taking an amethyst and switching it from sobriety to intoxication. Yes, I would say when you use stones, they have two things that are important. The first is their natural quality, which is what I'm largely talking about right now. But the second is their charge. And that charge is easiest to place if you're attuning it to that natural quality. For example, if you're charging a pearl, and you're charging it in accordance with that pearl's tendency to hold on to good positive emotion and to encourage good positive emotion, it will work easily. But if you're trying to use it for some other purpose, and I'll give you an example. One of my more treasured pieces of jewelry was given to me on the occasion of my 3rd degree initiation. And it involves pearls and garnets, which are the hereditary stone of my family. And the charge on this piece is for knowledge and success, basically. Not necessarily what Pearl normally focuses on, but it's an amulet. It involves the energy of the Pearl to also hold on to good things, but it also focuses in another direction. So yes, you can take a stone that normally focuses in one direction and charge it to focus in another. Trying to totally invert it is probably a little harder, but you know, you can do most things. Some are just going to be harder than others. I'm not sure why you would necessarily want to invert the energy of a stone rather than simply choosing one that's already focused in that direction. But can you? Yes, absolutely. You can do all kinds of things. And Draskus asks, do I have any thoughts on found natural stones versus purchased, refined, or tumbled stones? Is one better than the other? And yes, I do. And after that, we'll talk about synthetic stones as well. The difference between a natural stone versus a refined stone is also the difference between a stone with many imperfections versus a very clear stone. For example, if you're working with something like a diamond, and this is a diamond, that diamond will normally have occlusions or imperfections within it. That's also true for things like clear quartz or any crystalline stone. The fewer imperfections with a diamond, the more expensive it will be. And that's true too with something like clear quartz. If you're looking for one that's perfectly clear, you have to be careful it's not glass, but you can find them and they will cost more. But the natural stone, or the stone that has more occlusions, is going to have a lot more individual character. And what that means is when you attune to that stone, you may find that it has properties that might not be universal for that stone. It has much more individuality. Whereas the more perfect stone, and also the more refined stone, is going to be more archetypal in what it does. The more, quote, perfect the stone is, the more it will conform to what you expect from it. Also, with a refined stone that may have been cut in various different ways, that cut can also affect the properties. For example, if the stone is round, this will have the same properties that a circle has in geometric magic. If it's a square cut, it will have properties similar to what a square has in geometric magic anywhere. And the difference between that is round is amplification, squared is stability. If you're using a pear cut stone, and I don't believe I have any examples of that with me today, although I do own some, a pear cut stone, the shape would both amplify and direct. These are things that a shaped stone does that the natural stone does not. But at the same time, the natural stone will have its own idiosyncratic shape, which also can affect its energies. There are a lot of variables in what affects the energy of a stone. And when you're working with that kind of natural stone, again, its energy is going to be much more individual. And the less individual the stone is, the more refined, the more perfected. In most cases, the less individual its energy is. Now, I've talked about the ring of the Voodoo Queen of Kokomo, which I was able to see at the Lawrence Museum of Magic and Witchcraft many years ago, and how it had this very unusual surface. I've never in my life seen anything like it. I suspect it may have been art glass, but we'll come back to that in a minute. But it could have been a stone, and I simply did not recognize it. If it was a stone, it was an unusual one. But the surface was carved in the form of what I would call waves. Extremely not flat. It looked like a choppy ocean. This would make a very idiosyncratic energy, which the lady undoubtedly worked with. We could talk entirely too long about how that would have worked. But that kind of very irregular surface gave that ring a very individual energy. And that's true with anything like this. It's also true of jewelry such as this piece, which has many different stones all working together. That gives it a very idiosyncratic energy that, when focused, can be stronger than any one of those stones would be separate. They also have to be focused. These are some of the considerations when working with stones. Now, the question about found versus purchased depends entirely on the person. If you found it, chances are it was very much meant for you, and it may be more powerful on that account. But not necessarily, because if you purchase it and it called your attention, it was meant for you just as much as if you found it. And if you simply chose it, as long as you connect to it, it's still just as powerful. I am not a believer in the idea that there's anything wrong with purchasing what you want. In fact, I would say for a lot of these stones, you will never find them. You'll either purchase it or you won't get it. It's like when I was writing about tarot many years ago, and I addressed the superstition that your first tarot deck must be given to you, a point of view I do not agree with. One of the reasons is that can only happen if you know people who practice tarot. If you don't know anyone who would be able to give you one, where is it going to come from? You have to purchase it. Going into a metaphysical store and saying, could you please give me one, isn't going to get you very far. So I think we have to be practical in our outlooks. Now, I also said I was going to address synthetic stones. And this is a synthetic stone. I don't know how well you can see it. It's called goldstone. It was originally called millefiore when it was invented in, I believe, the 14th or 15th century. Today, it's normally called goldstone. And this is a particular synthetic stone invented during the Renaissance in Italy. It's considered good for money and prosperity. I have always used it in that context. It's incredibly beautiful. It does now come in multiple varieties. You can get a version in dark blue that looks like a nighttime starry sky and has slightly different properties. But is it not effective because it's synthetic? My mother used this all the time for prosperity. She was always prosperous. Lots of people in metaphysics use goldstone. Obviously, all those people consider it effective, as do I. So yes, a synthetic stone can absolutely be effective. It doesn't have to be a natural stone, but here's the difference. We were talking about the difference between an unrefined stone versus a refined stone, and how the unrefined stone will be more idiosyncratic. A synthetic stone is not likely to have any idiosyncrasies. And on occasion, depending on how it's been made, it may have less energy, but still has energy. But I find them just as effective. And I have to point out to you that stones like emeralds and rubies have been being manufactured longer than living memory. Lady Crystal has a beautiful ruby that has been passed down the heads of the High-Corel family for several generations now. The size of the fingernail of the little finger. Quite a large ruby, but also a manufactured ruby from the early part of the 20th century. Very powerful, very magical, despite being manufactured. But a natural ruby would have much more idiosyncrasy, even being refined, than a manufactured one, which is going to behave in a much more archetypal manner. But do they work? Absolutely. And if you're looking for that archetypal energy, nothing in the world wrong with them. Now, Draska says, I wonder if you buy it online and don't get a personal choice, would that affect its effectiveness? I won't say it couldn't, but my thought is that that means it's coming to you randomly. And if we don't believe in coincidence and randomness, if we believe that, for example, if we believe in things like omens and divination, which work on randomness, and we believe it's because spirit uses randomness to give you what you need, I would say, in fact, perhaps just the opposite. That it is one that spirit has chosen for you, and therefore perhaps more effective rather than less. Hello to Calvin in the chat room. And Calvin says, hello from Raleigh, North Carolina. Hello, Calvin, and hello, Raleigh. So I think that rather than decreasing its effectiveness, it would in fact increase it. I was going to show you a few more pieces of different stones, and also perhaps address a little bit more. We are near the end of our time, but this, for example, is amber. You've seen me wear it. It's a piece from my family, one of the ones I did not sell. And amber is not, of course, a stone. Amber is a resin. But when we talk about stones, we almost always include amber because it functions like a stone. Pearls, we mentioned pearls, also not stones. By any scientific definition, neither of these things are stones. But in metaphysics, we treat them as if they were, because we use them that way. And so if you find any correspondence list of stones, both pearls and amber are likely to be in it. Amber is considered a very magical stone. In certain traditions, amber and jet are considered particularly sacred because of historical qualities. And this is jet. And historically, they've both been considered very magical. In the Corellian tradition, we more commonly pair jet with pearl. Also has a long history of magical use. But these are one of the most common ways stones are used in ordinary life in the form of necklaces and jewelry. Jet is particularly used for protection, for grounding, and the like. Amber emphasizes one's personal powers and abilities, among other uses. Many of these stones have a wide range of uses. I showed you this piece, which involves a lot of hematite. Hematite and pearl, you can see it's very richly worked. Hematite is commonly used for grounding, but also defense against negativity. Hematite is a highly mirrored stone when it's refined, particularly, and is believed to send back negativity towards its origins. Among those other uses, also good for grounding. I showed you diamond. This is labradorite. This is turquoise. One of my very good pieces. This is natural shell. Natural shells also often show up in jewelry. Things like mother of pearl, and in metaphysical use. Mother of pearl has its metaphysical uses. Power shell has its metaphysical uses, despite being technically a shell. These are rubies, and rubies are very powerful. They're very good for energy. They're very good for vitality, which is true of most red stones. And most of these stones, as I say, they have multiple uses, usually not just one. So anything else I should show you that's right here at hand before I go? Well, I'll show you that. And here we have garnet. And garnet, garnet and ruby have a lot in common. And most stones will have things in common with other stones of similar color. Garnet is good for vitality, energy, amplification of magical power, personal power in any other way. It's a power stone. It's also good if you have cardiac issues, if you have circulation issues. This is one of the reasons historically it's been used, because it resembles the color of blood. Most of those qualities also attain to rubies. This piece belonged to my grandmother, as did several of the pieces I've shown you. So this concludes my discussion of stones and crystals for today, primarily because we are at the end of our half hour, and I cannot continue. But I hope that this has been interesting for you. I will perhaps continue this conversation on another day because there's so much more that can be said. But with that, let us have our prayer and end our day. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all the wonderful things in our world. We thank you for the wonderful people, the wonderful substances, such as stones, that make up the world we live in. And we thank you for being with us. And we thank you for the energies of all things and our ability to connect with them. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we ask you to guide us, to be with us. We thank you with great love and respect, and knowing you are always with us, but from respect, we thank you for your presence. May you be blessed now and always. And I thank you for your presence. I love you all. I love spending this time with you, and I'll look forward to seeing you again on Monday. And until then, may you be blessed now and always.